They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. So the fire, this is like super significant here, and something Henry actually even touched on last week a little bit, and I think it's really important to note the specific part here about the fire splintering off into tongues that rested on them, or sometimes translated to be hovering over top of them. And the Bible Project video that was shown last week, it talked a little bit about this, but we're going to go a bit more into depth because I think it's really cool. So Luke here, with this imagery and this verbiage of fire resting on the individual here, is trying to tie into what would have been a very, very important, recognizable Old Testament image. And we're going to kind of hang out in the Old Testament here for a second and look at a couple examples of what we can link this hovering fire to. And I think it just provides so much more like depth into this passage. So one example of this hovering fire we're going to look at first is when God's presence showed up similarly at Mount Sinai. So we're going to read Exodus 19:16 here. Perfect. So on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. So, in the next chapter, you've got Exodus 20, goes on to kind of encompass the purpose of God resting upon this mountain in fire. And in Exodus 20, Moses is given then the 10 Commandments. So God was making this covenant with his people here. He was giving a mass amount of his chosen people for the first really tangible time a due. This is how you're supposed to live. This is how you're supposed to treat people. This is how you're supposed to value them. This is how you go forth and live your life. And I think the standout part of the laws that are then given with these commandments show like really in depth the heart of God. And like it really shows the fact that he was telling people, this is how you treat people. This is how you love one another. Don't hurt them. Don't do things that break community or infringe on the right to life for anyone else. He was wanting people to be able to exist safely within community. And I've spoken about this kind of before, and it's one of like my really big passions when it comes to studying the Old Testament, is we don't always realize how culture shifting and shocking these laws that God was then giving his people, like how culture shifting they were. It was already a start of an upside down kingdom with this mentality. And God like also commands in his laws here that you get the part, well, he talks about it a lot, about don't worship other gods, don't make idols. And for me, I've like, before I really like dug into that, it's like, okay, yeah, all right. It seems almost kind of like self-absorbed or like, that's kind of vain. But if you do some historical research on some of the other gods that existed in Near East culture, you see how like profound this actually is. You realize like, oh yeah, okay, our God is actually really good. No wonder they shouldn't have wanted to worship. And no wonder he's hammering down on this fact. Don't look at other gods other than me. Because if you look at some of these gods that people were worshiping and the cultures around them, the cultures that the Israelites would have been immersed in, all the people around them, some of these gods were insanely like brutal. Like there's child sacrifice, there's all kinds of just harm that was being done to people. There were so many cultures that were just so enveloped in just hateful ways of life. So God is commanding here, this is how now you as people are meant to go and live, go and do. It's not just this no, it's not just this stand here, it's not just this believe. It's like, here you go, this is how you're supposed to go. So yeah, and through this fire, this image of fire, he commands in this circumstance, they weren't just no, they weren't just believe, they were go and do, go and live this way. So moving further, we're gonna look at another example of a command coming through the symbol of fire. So you have God's glory coming, also in a pillar of fire that filled the tabernacle. when he had come to live among them. This is one of the most beautiful parallels I've actually found with fire. I think when we're paralleling it with the upper room, what happened there that day. And we're going to read Numbers 9:15 to 22 here. So this chapter, it can almost come across as a little bit redundant when you first read it, but we'll go through that in a second. It's actually very significant when you sit in it for a bit. So the cloud above the tabernacle. On the day the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, was set up, the cloud covered it. From evening till morning, the cloud above the tabernacle looked like fire. That is how it continued to be. The cloud covered it, and at night it looked like fire. Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites set out. Wherever the cloud settled, the fire, the Israelites encamped. At the Lord's command, the Israelites set out, and at his command they encamped. As long as the cloud stayed over the tabernacle, they remained in camp. When the cloud remained over the tabernacle a long time, the Israelites obeyed the Lord's order and did not set out. Sometimes the cloud was over the tabernacle only a few days. At the Lord's command, they would encamp. And then at his command, they would set out. Sometimes the cloud stayed only from evening till morning, and when it lifted in the morning, they set out. Whether by day or by night, whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. Whether the cloud stayed over the tabernacle for 2 days or a month or a year, the Israelites would remain in camp and not set out. But when it lifted, they would set out. So yeah, that's a lot there. But I read that over a few times, and I kind of got like a little, almost like chills initially when I read that in tandem with the fire in the upper room correlation. So this imagery of fire resting above is this continual scriptural reference of guidance to doing and going and listening and obeying. I initially was going to cut this passage down and use just the verse 15, but it kind of just, I just got that little Holy Spirit, no, don't cut that out. That's important. And I think there's actually just this sheer significance of the following verses. And I think when you read over that passage quickly, it can kind of come across as slightly redundant, we read it pretty quickly. But I think there's this depth here of waiting fully and continually on the Lord's command no matter what. And you have this symbol of hovering fire here as well too. And I guarantee, I'm sure some of you are already drawing parallels to other instances this image is used in the Old Testament, which is a lot. There's a lot of them. So with this image parallel, Luke here is really trying to make a point of this, that God's personal temple presence and his guidance was now living not in the temple, not only set out as a beacon to watch from afar, inaccessible to most people. The Spirit now rests in the body of Jesus Christ, which are his followers. So to carry along this good news, everyone has now become a little mobile temple, really. So everyone has been commissioned to go and to do, not just to sit in the know, not just to sit in the believe, the go and do. So this symbolism of the tongues of fire resting on each of the people in the house is just this beautiful imagery that would have been very, very relevant to people familiar with Jewish culture and their biblical heritage. So I think it's important to note that as the scripture would have been originally read, this was all Old Testament language being used too. And we can separate it a lot in our minds sometimes, I think, as our modern translations can only do so much to give us that day one look into things, into meaning. But this language would have been very jarring and shocking to people, considering the body of believers, the body of Jesus, was now being spoken about the same way, with the same language as the temple. They were using the same verbiage. That would have been kind of wait, what? So, with the same imagery used when God's glory rested to give guidance. So, and interestingly enough, we talked about the ruach before, the breath, spirit, wind, and to tie this idea of God's Spirit in verse 2 with verse 3, that kind of gives us this idea that we're now the temple. Here's kind of a little thought-provoking fact. So I was listening to a podcast the other day between a couple theologians. They were talking about kind of the correlation of the old physical structure temple, and now the new body of Christ temple, which is us. And the Old Testament never actually talks about God's ruach filling the physical temple, filling the building. Never talks about that. It doesn't use that verbiage ever. It's always written as his kavod, his glory. It's always his glory. So his glory filled the temple, but his spirit now is coming to dwell in the temple of the communion of Jesus's followers. And this small detail was kind of like this little whoa moment. It's like this symbolism that the temple, what the people wanted, the temple could never accomplish what he intended for us. What he wanted for us was so much more personal. It was not empire, it was community. So the temple was this human creation that reflected the worship of human perceived gods and human perceived glory of gods. And God's glory was on display through the temple, but his breath, his spirit needed something so much more profound. That's us. His individual temples that can actually carry out his will for humanity, which is not empire, it's not conquest, it's not glory, it's people, it's love, it's kindness, it's community. It's what he wanted for us. That's what he built for us and intended for us.